I will continue with this series. I lost my train of thought. That's what happened. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my April wrap up. So as many of you will have seen or known, I participated in the Magical Readathon this past month, the revamped version, the Aurelium Academy, if you will, hosted over at Book Roast by G. So I'll leave all of my information down below. I did vlog the entire month, so almost everything except for the very first book and the very last book I'm going to talk about were part of this readathon. So I will leave all my vlogs down below if you'd like to know in-depth, in the moment thoughts on them, because there's a lot. I mean, this is just a staple now on this channel, is that I read a lot of books, okay? I consume a lot of material every month. I don't know what happened or when this started, but here we are. Because in the month of April I read 14 books. There's many to talk about. So let's get right into the stats. So as I mentioned, I read 14 books, and that was over 4,021 pages and 91 hours-ish. And that was over 4 audiobooks, 4 physical books, 1 ebook, and 5 mixed. Then we've got age category, which is relatively normal for me at this point. We had 1 middle grade, 2 YA, 2 new adult, and 9 adult books. Genres were pretty, well, they were a little spread, but also contained in a sense. So we had 6 romance books, 5 fantasy books, 1 historical fiction, 1 mystery, and 1 poetry. And then ratings were pretty normal for me. Again, we had 4 5 stars, 9 4 stars, and 1 3 star. So the very first book that I read is one that I've been literally reading for a month at this point. It's one that I've been reading with my lovely friend Taylor on and off because there's no audiobook or anything, there's only the physical option, and that is Blood and Promise by Miranda Lynn. This is the first in her Fae Rising series, and this one follows our 2 main characters, Ara and Tamir, and Ara is, I think, half Fae. No, she's a high Fae. It takes place in this world where there are high Fae and lesser Fae, and they're really at odds with each other, and that's really what this entire story is about, is this fight between higher and lesser Fae, basically. And the idea is that, like, lesser Fae, you can tell they're lesser because of some kind of physical attribute, because lesser Fae is created when more than one species commingle. And so, like, for example, Tamir is lesser Fae and he has horns, so that really kind of shows that. So Ara's high Fae, and her story primarily is her discovering some stuff about herself, about her family, about her past, and going on an adventure. And then we've got Tamir on the reverse side of that, which is in a different court in this world. And like I said, he's lesser Fae, but he has the ability to heal, so the king kind of takes him into his court because he wants to have this ability that he could just heal anybody at any time. And so this lesser Fae is kind of the exception to the rule. Like, people still don't like him because of this, but he is the exception to the rule because he can have this healing ability. And it's his experience in this court and kind of the stirrings, the start of rebellion, let's say. So it's the 2 of them and their different stories. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I have mixed feelings about this one because, I mean, I think it suffered from the fact that it took forever to get through this book because we were both super busy. Again, physically reading was really difficult at the time, and so we would read like a couple chapters here, a couple chapters there. But we purposely finished this book in this month. We took our time out, we made sure that we did it, and I think that worked really well. So this one, I will say trigger warnings for death of a parent, sexual assault, and attempted rape, because those are big things within this story. Women are not treated great. Shocking, I know. So that's just, be wary of that. But my biggest issue with this one, and I think it stems from the fact that this is a debut from this author. At this point, the author has written 4 or 5 books, I think, so I assume that this gets better, but this is the only book that I've read by her, and it is her debut. And I think you can tell because these chapters switch back and forth between Ara's perspective and Tim's perspective. So you go Ara, Tim, like there's no it's always flipping back and forth, and I think that hurt the book at times, because there would be situations when Tim's story would be super interesting, and then you would all of a sudden switch to Ara's story, and her story would just kind of be meh, and vice versa. I will say most of the time it was Ara's story was really interesting and Tim's was not, and so you'd be really in this like super high impactful story, and you'd start the chapter kind of meh, and then by the end you're really invested in what Ara's doing, and then we'd swap back to Tim's story, and he would just kind of be not really doing a whole lot, and then we'd get back to Ara's stories, and we'd have to kind of like get back into her story. So I think if there was a way to basically maybe not switch every chapter, so do like, if Ara has like particularly exciting things, do like a few chapters in her perspective and then move to Tim's, because I think just that swap, while it is interesting and I like seeing both characters and what they're doing in their different worlds, and like they're different, not worlds because they're in the same world, but like they're not together, and so seeing what's happening in different parts of this world is great, and I liked that, but I think switching every single chapter is what hindered my enjoyment of this, kind of the second half of this book. But I really liked the story. So the ending did have kind of a pretty decent cliffhanger, to the point of I was like, ooh, I need the next one. So I am going to continue. I don't know when. I'm not giving up on the series, not by a long shot. But I think the biggest issue I had with this book specifically is I am not sure what happened. Like, I know what happened to these characters, but I don't know why. Like, the why is still a question. There's not really a main plot to the story. It's like these two characters are doing their things, and then I think the main plot's going to kick off in the second one. So this one feels very prequel-esque in the sense of like, it's setting up the world, but you have to be invested in the characters in order for it to continue. Otherwise, you don't care. You have no idea why the story is being told, and you just kind of want to give up. So I can see a lot of people giving up after the first one, but again, this all could be because of how it was read, and I read like the first 20 pages and then put it down for like 2 months. So it could be I just read it differently, and so like I didn't pick up on a lot of the things that were happening, but I still want to read the rest of the series. I think now we're going to start getting into some of the things that I really enjoyed. So if this is a series that sounds interesting to you about like high fae and things like that, then I think you will have to give the second one a chance. Like, I think that there's no way to actually like decide how you feel about the series based on the first one. But I still liked a lot of the aspects of it because I did give it 4 stars. But this sounds like I really didn't like it. I did enjoy it. I just had a lot of like nitpicky things about it that didn't sit well. The next book is what we started off the readathon with, and it was by far, well, actually, maybe not my favorite, but like it's way up there, and that is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I finally started this series, and it is so good. So I gave this 5 stars. I mean, surprise. So I will say trigger warnings for abuse, both physically and emotionally, so just be wary of that. I am obsessed. Like, this is one that I've heard a lot of people say if you like the ACOTAR series, you'll really like this series as well, and I attest. Yes, that is true. There are definitely parts of this where I don't know how to explain it to you. Like, the feeling I got when I was reading the ACOTAR series, especially like the last few in that series, is how I felt about this one. I couldn't put it down. I didn't want to put it down. I was already hooked within the first 50 pages. No, less than that. I was already hooked in the first chapter. But like, within the first 50 pages or so, I was like, I'm gonna love this book. There's no way I'm not going to love this book. So this story follows our main character, Poppy, and she is a maiden. And basically what that means is you are going to ascend at some point in the future. Now, it's not explained what ascension is, but you are going to ascend. And she has to be pure. She can't be touched. She can't like experience pleasure. She can't basically have any fun in life. And she has to be covered at all times because she's like this super special person, and she has to be preserved for the gods, basically. And so you've got her, and then within like the first 100 pages or so within the book, she gets a new bodyguard named Hawk, and he is opening up her world to many things. And it's just the two of them working around each other, learning to like work with each other, because like she does things like, for example, one of the other guards is like a good mentor for her and he teaches her how to fight, and that's like a no-no. So it's just like this learning experience between the two of them, and I love their relationship. I love all of the huge plot twists at the end that I guessed literally seconds before. Well, not 100%, because like I understand why no one really talks about the magical elements of this book, but I feel like there's a way that you can talk about them without spoiling it. But I guessed a couple of things about the end of this book, not fully, but a little bit of the way, based on a couple of things that I picked up from, like, specifically Hawke's character, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because I am really bad at picking up clues, so I feel very accomplished, but I don't know if that means that they were super obvious, so people who like to read a lot of mysteries and don't pick up on those things rather quickly, or do pick up on those things rather quickly, would have guessed the ending well before it. I don't know. But, like, I don't know how to explain this book to you, because like, there's so much about the plot that I can't explain, but I adored this. I was literally obsessed with this. I didn't want to put it down for days. I think I started this on like a Friday, and I finished it by the end of the weekend. I was done within like 2 days because I was like, what? And I wanted to immediately pick up the second one, but TBR things wouldn't let me. So hopefully I'll get to it this month. But this is going to be a series that I'm going to be obsessed with. Like, to the point of I'm already now looking into, you know, should I get the first book in the prequel series that she's writing, or should I wait until that one's done? Like, this world has consumed me. So I loved this book, and I cannot really articulate to you why I enjoyed it. It just became an obsession really quickly. The next book that I picked up was Only a Monster, and this is by Vanessa Lynn. So this one is actually, I think, the first in a series, though this is the only one that is out because it did come out this year. It's also one of my Fairy Loot books. I think this is my January book, and I read it within the year I got it. I mean, crazy. That never happens. But I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I was honestly quite surprised. Like, I was afraid to read anything after From Blood and Ash, because I was so obsessed with that anything I read suffered. So I purposely picked a book that I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about. Like, I didn't pick a book that I was like my Tessa Dare read, or something else that I was like, I want to love this book, so I'm gonna not read it after the book that I adored, because I think anything I read after it's gonna suffer. But this was the perfect book to read after it, because while maybe, yes, some aspects of this book might have suffered from it, I still adored this book. Like, I still think about this book to this day. There are aspects about this where I, like, legit questioned if I was a good person. Because, so this book, let me tell you what this book's about. It follows our main character, who I have forgotten already. I know, we're shocked. Joan. She's a 16-year-old that is currently in London. She works at this kind of, like, historic site that is this home that I think used to be like someone's home, and has now been kind of turned into a museum. And at this London historic site, she works there every summer, so she's there during the summer. She has this guy named Nick, who she just has the hugest crush on, and has been, like, had a crush on for a long time. And this book basically starts with, like, it says in the synopsis, a Good Samaritan attempt gone wrong, and Joan then learns about her family and her past, and she comes from a family of monsters, and it turns out that Nick is a monster hunter. And so she's like, oh no. So basically what it means is there is the specific power that all monsters have, and that is the ability to travel into the future. But each family has another thing on top of it, like another kind of power that makes it specific to that family. So the time traveling thing is what makes you a monster, and then the other trait or other power is what makes you that part of that family. And so you have her, and she's just now finding out this stuff because she's actually half monster. Her dad is, like, immortal. I don't know what the right term is, but, like, he's a human. And then her mom's family is the monster side. And so it's her discovering this thing. And then she ends up going on this adventure with this guy named Aaron, who is, like, a rival family to her family. And it's super interesting because, like, this time travel gift is dark. Like, the reason that you can time travel, I don't want to say too much in case I spoil it, but the reason that you can actually go into the future is so dark. So, like, you're sitting there and you're like, wow, that's a cool gift, but, like, the cost of the gift, like, it's fascinating. I want to know how the author came up with this, because I'm sitting there and I'm like, I mean, I'm like, I'm on the side of the monsters, and I shouldn't be on the side of the monsters, but because it's being told from like her perspective and she's part of this family, it's like I'm rooting for them even though their gift is kind of awful. So it's like, it's very interesting, but it definitely gives me those kind of like Mortal Instruments vibes where it's like you're going through different parts and you have different families and different people can do different things, and they're also trying to solve this kind of mystery element aspect of it as well. And it's just really fascinating, and it ended in a way where this could be the one and done book. You could be happy with the end of this one, but I'm curious to see where the story could go in the future, because like I said, this felt like an ending, but I don't know, like, but there's going to be more. So I have many questions. But yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I thought the writing and the story was really fascinating. I got sucked in really, really quickly. And it's really good. So I was surprised, not that I didn't think it was going to be good, but I didn't know what to expect from it. I have this love-hate relationship with YA right now, where like some things are great and some things are not. And so I was hesitant, you know, but it was great. The next book that I picked up is The Heiress, and this one is by Molly Gurley. The full name is actually The Heiress, The Revelations of Anne de Bourgh. And I ended up giving this one 4 stars as well. This is, honestly, I think this is a staple for any Jane Austen or Pride and Prejudice fan, because it is such a unique and beautiful look at the character of Anne de Bourgh, which in the original Pride and Prejudice is such a throwaway character. Like, the entire book is pretty much from Lizzie's perspective, so, you know, she doesn't think twice about Anne, because Anne shows up like once or twice maybe in the book, and she's just kind of like in the background, doesn't matter. She's just this character who was thought to be very sickly by her mom, and her mom telling everyone that she's very, very sickly, so like she doesn't go outside or do anything, so she's just kind of there. And this book takes her perspective and shows her life. Now, I would say 95% of this book takes place after the events of Pride and Prejudice, but there is a chunk at the beginning that kind of sets up everything, so you get her childhood. So I will say trigger warnings for addiction and substance abuse, if that is something, because that is a huge part of this story. Because we follow Anne as she was really sickly and really wouldn't stop crying when she was a young kid, so the doctor prescribed laudanum to her. And so now to this day, she takes laudanum, I think, in the middle of the day. I think it's only once a day, maybe twice a day right before sleep as well. But it's this beautiful story of Anne as she kind of comes into her own and tries to get out of the shadow of her mother and kind of tries to take her life back and be who she wants to be. And there's also a queer element to this book, which I didn't know going into it. I looked it up on Goodreads after I'd started it, and like in the genre section to see kind of like what the major genre was. It had like LGBTQ plus read, and I was like, what about this is that? And so it was really interesting when that aspect came into play, and I loved the story. But my favorite part about this was actually the writing, because it's written in such a very lyrical and poetic way, but it's not hard to understand, so it lends itself well to feeling like it's a classic, like it's part of, you know, the Pride and Prejudice world, like it could possibly have been written by Jane Austen. It's not. It's significantly more contemporarily written than that, but this very poetic style and the way that Anne looks at the world lends itself really well to that classic feeling style. But Anne has very fascinating ways of looking at the world, and I don't think it's, you know, her being on laudanum. I think it's just her as a character, because she'll look at a tree, and like you and I see, a tree, nothing fancy, and she'll describe it in this beautiful way that you're like, I can picture exactly what you're saying. So it was just beautiful. So like I said, I highly recommend if you have any interest in Pride and Prejudice, because, well, you can read this book without having read Pride and Prejudice, or maybe you don't have to read it, but like to know the story really well. It helps because, you know, you see hints here and there of characters that show up. Very briefly, but like, you know, some of the characters, like Darcy's a pretty decent big part of the story. Colonel Fitzwilliam is Darcy's cousin and Anne's cousin, and he's a huge part of the story as well. And then occasionally, like for example, Mr. Collins and Charlotte Lucas, who becomes Charlotte Collins, shows up, but it's just briefly, but like you're like, and like you're watching these characters and you're like, that's really cool, because like I know this character's story, and now seeing this, like Anne's look at her, that's very different. I don't even know how to explain it all, but I really loved it, and I think that it's, again, a staple for a Pride and Prejudice fan. I think it's so good because most retellings are not great, or reimaginings, or, you know, spin-offs like this are okay, but, you know, not amazing, and this one's really good. The next book I picked up was my Tessa Dare read, which was Do You Want to Start a Scandal? This is the last book in the Spindle Cove series, the 5th book, but also the 4th book in the Castles Ever After series, so it's kind of a crossover of sorts. Now, the Castles Ever After series, from like the 2 that I've read from it, don't really go together. They're just like take place around castles or with people who own castles. But this one takes place at the Parkhurst Ball, or at least the first part does. And at this ball, which is kind of, I think, like a country estate, where you like go and you stay for a couple of weeks, and so one night there just happened to have a ball. And at this ball, there was a tryst in the library. And our main character, Charlotte, is in the room, and people think it's her. And this other guy, who is Lord Granville Pierce Brandon, and it's not. And so she's trying to convince the world that it wasn't her, and everyone thinks that it was, because her mom is very much loud about how she wants her daughter to marry well. And so people think very not highly of Charlotte. So she is convinced to find out who actually was in this room, and she and Pierce are trying to figure that out. So you have that kind of mysterious element to it as well, where like Charlotte is really into like puzzles and stuff, and so she's trying to figure out who this is. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, but it wasn't my favorite, and I think it's because I have seen Charlotte. She's kind of shown up throughout the Spindle Cove series. One of the full-length novels and one of the novellas within the series follows her 2 sisters, so you see her sisters and you see her in like the background of those stories, and because of that we have a very specific look on her, and this Charlotte is not the same Charlotte that we've come to know. So like I was really excited about getting Charlotte's story, and I felt like this was a different character. So I think if you go into it without having read the Spindle Cove series, without having all of those preconceived notions in your head, this is great because you're learning about Charlotte in a brand new light. But having those, you know, small snippets and small looks at who Charlotte was in the past, this feels very out of character. Specifically the puzzle aspect of her, and how she loves to solve puzzles, because that's never come up before, and it should have. So, I mean, I still enjoyed it. I still liked their relationship and their banter. I found it really interesting because he has a kind of a mysterious past of sorts that lends really well for her puzzle-liking-ness of her character, and seeing the 2 of them kind of figure out what's going on. And I don't know, I liked it, but it wasn't the most amazing thing I've read by her, which is fair. I feel like that's kind of my entire... You could say that for the entire Spindle Cove series. I feel like it's not her best work, but I enjoyed it. So this one's not my favorite in the series. I still think the 4th one's my favorite, but I still did have a good time reading it. It's just there was little bits that I was like, meh, it was just okay, you know? Like, it's just... So the next one I picked up was the little itty-bitty novella Galatea by Madeline Miller. Sorry, short story, not novella. And this is the author who wrote Song for Achilles and Circe, which I adore so very much. And this is based on the myth by the same name, Galatea, which is a myth that follows this woman, well, this sculptor, who really looks down on everyone in his town, thinks that everyone is basically like sleeping around. And that's a big no-no. So he carves this woman out of marble and basically is like, oh my gosh, she's the perfect woman. I wish she was real. And one of the gods actually turns her into a human, and they end up like having a kid and living life. That's basically, it's a very short myth. And so this is Madeline's look at that, where it's the same idea of this sculptor and this woman who was stone, but she has more thoughts and feelings, whereas in the original myth, this character didn't say anything, I don't think. She's just kind of there for the sculptor now that he's got this perfect wife. Yay. Whereas this one, it's like, okay, well, what does that do to the woman? How does that affect her psyche? How does, like, you know, how would she feel about most of her rights not being her rights and things like that? So that's really what this book follows. I can't really say a whole lot about this because, again, super, super short. But it is a super feminist look at her and kind of her standing up for herself against her husband, who has basically like put her under lock and key at this point, and has doctors coming in to like make her be quiet, for lack of a better word. Comes to visit her every once in a while because he likes that feeling of her being stone, kind of, and her succumbing to anything that he wants and not really talking. So it's dark. He's very obsessive with her and obsessive of how she is, and if she's not that, then he kind of freaks out. So it's her in this situation, and it's super easy. I was able to finish this in like 15 minutes. Like, it's a very, very short story, but I love Madeline Miller's writing. I love her take on these myths, especially like this one, which is so small, doesn't make an impact in the grand scheme of things, and many people would just overlook. But she was like, what if? What if we took it from her perspective? What if she thought this instead? And so I just found that really interesting, and I loved, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's not good. Like, you're sitting there and you're like, you hurt for her, and it was good for what it was, which was really short. The next one I picked up was Learned My Lesson, which is the second in the Wicked Villains series by Katie Robert. And so I gave this one 4 stars. I have a lot of the same feelings as I did with the first book in the series, where it's kind of set in this world where it's called Carver City, and in this world there are a bunch of people, and they all happen to be from Disney, stories. So this one specifically follows Hades, Meg, and Hercules. So Hades and Meg have this relationship that's kind of falling apart. He's in charge of this BDSM kind of club, and she is his right-hand man, basically. And they've had this incredible relationship, but it seems to be falling apart because they're not like talking about things. And so Hercules comes into the mix and like stirs everything up and basically says, we need to talk about your issues, and they do. And so like that's basically the point of the story, is as far as an erotic romance can go, this one is character driven, because it's the 3 of them learning to like really have those emotions and like act on those emotions and talk about those emotions and make sure that everyone in this relationship is comfortable and important and heard and things like that. So like you have this beautiful character development of sorts through this, where you see like Hercules come into his own, and then you see Hades and Meg grow closer, and then you see Hercules being the glue between all 3 of them. And it's really nice, but I like some plot. I've always known that I'm more plot driven than character driven, but I never really noticed it this much before, because I was sitting here and I was like, I liked the first one better. And that's because the first one has a lot of plot and this one has a lot of character. I'm also curious if there was a little disconnect from me, because this is the first time that I've read a main couple having 3 people in it. So I've never really read a relationship like that before. I usually read like 2-person relationships. So maybe the chemistry and the dynamic between those characters was throwing me off, and I was trying to get used to how that works. So maybe that threw me off, and so they were focused on that. I'm not sure what it was. I still enjoyed it. I still liked seeing the hints at the other people in this world, and specifically the 3rd book is going to follow Tink, and so she is a pretty big part in the first 2 books. So seeing her in this one, it was really nice to see where it could possibly go in the future. Seeing some of the characters from the first book, so it was like nice seeing all these like side characters that we know. But it wasn't my favorite in the series. But it was still fun. I still really enjoy Katie Roberts' writing style. I'm going to finish the series because I'm invested in the characters as people. So I enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite. The next book I picked up was my middle grade book, and that is The Magic Misfits by Neil Patrick Harris, the second one, which is the second story. This one was really interesting because this is a 4-book series. Each one follows a different character, which I didn't realize until I started this one. So the first one follows our main character, Carter, who is this blonde guy right here on the cover. And then this one follows Leia, who is this one who's upside down. And it follows her. I mean, it takes place after the events of the first one, but it's from her perspective. And so each book in this series is going to be from a different perspective. And everything about this was still fun. Like, there are bits and pieces between the chapters that still explain how to do magic. Like, you've got these in between sections where it shows you how to do the magic tricks that they have been talking about, so that like you, if you were a young kid or as the reader, can like do these fun magic tricks for your friends. Now, this is definitely the lower side of middle grade. It tends to that younger side, but that doesn't mean like the issues and things talked about are not important. Because like our main character, she has 2 dads, and that's a big thing, and they talk about it a lot. And there's also this like magic society that they belonged to, and so that keeps coming up. But the primary focus of this is an old friend of theirs who is a fortune teller. I'm actually going to flip the book upside down because that's her right there. She comes back and is putting on a show, and so they're trying to figure out who she is, how she fits in, and then some weird stuff starts going on. And they're learning a lot about this society their dads were part of. So the plot didn't really kick in until about halfway through. So the first part was just like, this is fine. And then the second part was like nonstop action. And I was like, this is what I'm interested in. So one thing that I did enjoy, which I think they will continue to do, is at the beginning of this book, they have this like welcome back section where it talks about all of the characters in this little friend group, which is 6 characters, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's 6 characters, or 6 kids, and so it kind of talks to you about each of them. It somewhat summarizes the first book enough that you can continue with it, which I think is so clever, because like, yes, you do that in your writing, but the way that Neil Patrick Harris has written this book is very like breaks the fourth wall over and over and over again. So of course you're going to have that, and I just think it works really well for the style. It's very fun, very like, I don't want to say goofy, but like it just feels like a nice fun book. No super high stakes or anything like that. I mean, if you're a kid, you're probably thinking, oh my god, these stakes are so high, but like on my end, I'm like, oh, that's fun. But it gets interesting at times, and I'm interested to see where we continue from here, because I feel like we're going to learn some things. And we learn a lot about Leia as a character, because like she did come from a foster home, and then her dad's adopted her, and so you see a lot about her past, a lot of kind of small traumatic things that happen to her that like really steer her future, or kind of how she reacts to things. And it was cute. It's not the most amazing thing I've ever read, but I do get a kick out of them. I do really enjoy my time reading them, and I hopefully will not put as much time between the second one and the third one and the fourth one as I did between the first 2, because I think that hindered my enjoyment of it just a little bit. The next book is I Read Was Love Only Once, which is by Joanna Lindsey. This is the first in the Mallory series. Now, I will say this is the book that I ended up giving 3 stars to. It was fine. I had no issue with a lot of this book, but I was bored for a lot of it, and that's why I got 3 stars. So in this one, we follow Regina, who is a cousin of the Mallorys. So basically the Mallorys are 5 kids. There's 4 boys and 1 girl, and the girl is Regina's mom. And she died when Regina was super young, so her uncles have kind of taken care of her. She's gone from uncle to uncle as she's grown up. And now she's in London, and she's been ready to like get married, and she's there for the season to try to find a husband. And every single person she kind of brings to her uncles as a possible candidate, one of them shoots down for one reason or another. So she comes to one of her uncles, Anthony, and basically says, hey, look, I'm done. You all decide who I'm marrying, because like I brought up like hundreds of men to you guys, maybe not hundreds, but like a good dozen or 2 men to you guys. And now London is calling me like this, I don't remember what the name is for her, they get for her, but like they're calling her this crazy name because like she keeps rejecting all these suitors, and she's like, it's not even my fault, it's you guys' fault, so you guys decide between the 4 of you who's good for me, and I'll marry them. And so that's her story. And then on the other side of that, you have Lord Edward, who mistakes Regina for somebody else and ends up kidnapping her. And then they realize their mistake, but it's too late, and society is like, you guys were seen together, so they're kind of forced to get married, and it's the 2 of them. So my biggest issue with this is there's a lot of not talking between our characters, and if they just talked about things, then everything would be solved. But they didn't, because Lord Edward has like a lot of stuff in his past. He has a very strained relationship with his mother, and you learn about that along the way, and because of that, he is going into this marriage and acting a specific way, where like all of his aunts and even his Regina is like, we get it. But so my biggest issue was their banter is so much fun. I love the scenes between the two of them, but that is such a small portion of this plot because a lot of the story, they're not even in the same place. And I just wish they talked about their feelings. If they just talked about things. That was my biggest issue. It's like the middle chunk of this book was just boring. But I liked seeing all of the, you know, the uncles, the Mallorys, seeing these characters. And like, for example, this was everyone's first look at Anthony, who is the second book's about him, and I adored the second book. So it was nice seeing him in this story because he's definitely the uncle that has the most time. And then also the other uncle who I really enjoyed, which is James, and he is seen in the second book, which I love him in the second book. The third book's completely about him, so I'm excited to see him. But it was just kind of like, okay, you know, like there wasn't anything amazing that stuck out to me. I enjoyed my time reading it. I liked seeing these two characters finally figure stuff out, but I liked other people in this world better. I liked the uncles better, and I already had like that tie to Anthony. But there's definitely a huge trope in here that I will not say because it spoils a lot of the story, but it's a big trope that a lot of people don't like. So maybe if you don't mind spoilers, looking into that, because I can see a lot of people being really upset with this story, but that's not a trope that like I read a lot of, so I didn't mind it as much, but it's in there. Even though I can't tell you what it is, but I'm sure you can guess. But yeah, most of this was just annoyance at them not talking to each other and talking about their issues, because when they were together, they never actually came out and said what they thought. And I was like, look, I get that that is what is driving this plot, but like, come on, talk about your issues, please. So, not my favorite, but I am excited to see where this story goes. I mean, it still got 3 stars. I still enjoyed a good chunk of this book. So, I'm excited to see the rest of the series. Next one I picked up was Aphrodite Made Me Do It by Trista Mater. This is a poetry collection. I mean, it's an art collection. It's got poems in it. They have illustrations in here as well. Poems can be super long. Some of them are like prose. Some of them are like 2 sentences long. I'm trying to find a good one. There you go. That's a poem right there. So it's just a collection of like art, prose, and stuff. But I think it's written in a very interesting way because it is like it's told from like Aphrodite's perspective at some times. So you switch back and forth from Aphrodite's perspective to the author's perspective, Trista. So it's like Aphrodite airs her grievances, the poet airs her grievances. Aphrodite speaks on love, the poet speaks on love. So you see this poet's look at Aphrodite and seeing like a very feminist look at this goddess of love. And then you see her in her own life talking about her relationships and her like past and things like that, and how that relates to maybe what Aphrodite is going through. So it's definitely a feminist and very impactful and empowering is the better word, look at this character. So I will say trigger warnings for rape, sexual assault, and just general homophobia, queerphobia, whatever you want to call it, just like general not niceness. So those are big things within this book, but this was very reminiscent in my head to Goddess of the Hunt, which I read as a poetry collection I read I think last month in March. It's very reminiscent of that, but this one has a very different tone to it, where that one was very like peaceful. This one is almost like angry at times, which, you know, that's just the difference in the poetry styles. But there's not a whole lot to say about it because poetry is such a personal experience, so everyone's going to get something different from it. But I liked seeing all of the different parts of this. I like the poems, I like the prose, I like seeing some of the illustrations as we were going. It's just like a collection of art stuff. And I did enjoy it, so I gave it 4 stars. The next one I read was Dial A For Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutano. This one got 4 stars. I am in love with this book. So in this one we follow our main character, Madeline, and she and her 3 aunts and her mother all own this wedding business. So they each do a different aspect of it. So she's the photographer, one of her aunts does the cake, her mom does the flowers, another aunt is the makeup and hair, and the other aunt is the entertainment, so like the singer at the reception. And so it's like this collective like family business. You get all of this if you hire this business. And so they are getting ready for this super big high-end kind of wedding. And it's happening the next day, but her mom sets her up on a date. So she ends up going on a blind date the night before, and due to crazy circumstances, her date ends up dying. And so it's her and her aunts and her mom trying to figure out what to do, because like she's in a situation where it looks really bad, and so they're trying to hide the body basically, and then it ends up showing up at this wedding, and it's them kind of going crazy, and then a flame from Madeline's past when she was in college shows back up, and it's this relationship. And the shenanigans, the utter shenanigans these aunts and Madeline get into is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Like, there is no way, you have to suspend belief when you're reading this book, because there is no way they would have gotten away with half of the stuff they got away with, because like someone would have looked at them and gone, that's suspicious, and would have found out what's going on. But like, it just is so ridiculous. And also there's family drama within the sisters. Like, the two older sisters are at odds, and the two younger sisters are at odds. And then there's also family drama at the family where the actual wedding is taking place. So like that family, there's drama, and then there's another like mystery plot on top of it. Like, there's just so much happening, and I think it's ridiculous, but I loved every second of it. So I gave it 4 stars. Again, you have to suspend belief when you're reading this book, because it's insane, but it's a lot of fun. It's just pure fun. So I'm excited to continue with the sequel, hopefully this summer sometime. The next book is my favorite book from this month. I thought it was going to be From Blood and Ash, and it honestly could be tied, but that is A Daughter of the Trolls by Mackenzie Catron. This is an indie book that I was actually given it's actually a finished copy, but this beautiful arc of, and it came out in April. And honestly, if you are any sort of fan of YA fantasy of any sort, do yourself a favor and get this book, because it is, like, I literally can't stop thinking about it. Like, I've now ordered the hardback edition of it, because like I want to support the author so much, and also I adore this book. Like, I need to calm down. So basically, in this book, we follow 18-year-old Sparrow, who due to a heart condition is in a wheelchair. She doesn't have enough strength to really like walk. So she is in this wheelchair in this place called the Glade, and it is protected from this, they call him Boogeyman, but it's kind of like this like mythology kind of character where like you have been told stories about as a kid, and is actually a real thing. And she is called Black Annis, and she is a skin-stealing, poison-ingesting witch. So due to the circumstances, like something crazy happens, Sparrow ends up having to go on this adventure with her half-goblin friend Rush through the forest in a wheelchair, and is very not wheelchair friendly. So it's this story of, you know, the normalization of disability, as well as this fantastical fantasy plot. And seriously, I like this was a book that I had to read physically. Of course, there's no audiobook, there's nothing, and I got through this in like a week, because I wanted to read this. And when I was at work, I just wanted to, you know, go home and read. Like, I was so invested in this story. And what I loved about this is the fact that the author, Mackenzie, is actually wheelchair bound herself in a very similar way to Sparrow. So it's very much an own voices story. It's her kind of putting her own grievances and her own thoughts into the world, or into this character. And also having an amazing fantasy plot, and having these characters that are based on actual mythology. Like, the character of Black Annis is actually based on a real mythological character. And there's a couple other characters within this book that are other like boogeyman type characters that are from mythology. And there had to be so much research that went into this, and I adored this book. I don't know if I can like tell you how amazing it was. So leave my Goodreads review down below, because that will go into much more detail about this. But I loved it. I'm curious to see what else this author comes out with, because honestly, like, this is her debut, and it was written beautifully. Like, it was one of my favorite books ever. Like, if this does not make it onto my favorites of the year, I will legit be surprised. So I adored this. Gave it 5 stars. please do yourself a favor and read it, because like you will not be sorry. The next book I picked up was Electric Idol by Katie Robert, which is the second in her Dark Olympus series. The first one was Neon Gods, which I read I think last year, and that one followed Persephone and Hades, and this one follows Psyche and Eros, and so they're all based on Greek mythology in some way. But they're set in this world called Olympus. It's like a modern city, and there are 13 people kind of running this city. And those 13 are like the gods. And so you've got Zeus, who's like really the running everything, Aphrodite, Athena, Hades, Demeter, like all of those people are kind of running the city and doing different things within the city. And those titles are called legacy titles. So depending on the specific title, some of them are passed down from father to son, like Hades and Zeus. Some of them are like the title of Apollo is decided based on a competition. I think the title of I think Aphrodite is decided, so like if you're Aphrodite and you feel like you're going to die, or you have a will, you name your heir, and so like that person's the one who immediately becomes Aphrodite, that kind of stuff. So depending on the character, but they're like titles that are passed down. So these people have names, but then once they become this title, that's now their name. Like, for example, the title of Hera is given to whoever marries Zeus. So you clearly have a name before you marry Zeus, and then when you marry Zeus, you become Hera, and your previous name doesn't matter. And so this one, like I said, follows Psyche and Eros, and in this one, Psyche has ticked off Aphrodite in some way. And so Eros is kind of Aphrodite's right-hand man. He's her son, and she is basically, for lack of a better word, he's her hitman. Someone ticks her off, she says, go solve this, and he kills them. And so she comes to him and says, Psyche needs to go. And he kind of has this connection with her, and he's like, I don't like that, actually. And so they end up getting together in order to save her from dying, and it's very high stakes. And one thing I love about this series is that I've been reading is this is more romance, whereas her Wicked Villain series is more erotica, which is fine. I mean, each of us have our own thing, but this one has quite a lot more plot to it, and I love all the Greek inspired things within this book, and just like I don't know how to explain it, but like there's more plot to it. I love Greek inspired things. You guys know this. So like all of those are recipes for me to love this book, which I did. I gave it 5 stars. And now I'm in this like Dark Olympus hole, and I can't wait for the 3rd one to come out, which is coming out sometime this summer. There is a prequel kind of novella in this series, which I really want to read, because like I need more Dark Olympus things. I don't know what it is about this world. It's very like glitz and glamour, and they're the stars, and so everyone is trying to get in and like find tabloids and things like that, are trying to find information about them, and like that is not something that I should enjoy, and yet I do. So I completely fell in love with these characters. I fell in love with the world that Katie Robert has written. I think to this day Dark Olympus is my favorite, like this series is my favorite of hers, and I loved seeing the characters of Psyche and Psyche and Eros kind of, get to know each other and see their characters develop, and, their feelings develop, and seeing the relationship between Psyche and her mother and Psyche and her sisters and things like that, because her mother is Demeter and Persephone is her sister. I don't know, again, I've said this every time, but I'm not sure that's real as far as Greek mythology goes. Like I know Demeter is Persephone's mom, but I don't know how Psyche fits in. I feel like she doesn't fit in myth-wise, but like for the purpose of this world, Katie Robert has made her. I'm not sure, but in this world they're all sisters, and there's 2 more sisters in this family, and I love seeing them, and that relationship between Psyche and Eros is it's really great, and again, high stakes. I feel like if you're like a fan of mafia romance, this isn't a mafia romance, but like there are aspects of it that you would really enjoy. So 5 stars for sure, which leads really well into the next book, which is a very, very, it's not even a novella, it's like a short story. It is 10 pages long. It's called Hades and Hades, and it's actually a Patreon short, so you can't really read it, but it's a Patreon short that Katie put out a couple of months ago, and like I said, it's called Hades and Hades, and it shows how the Hades and Dark Olympus and the Hades and the Wicked Villains series is connected. And it's just a quick 10-book or 10-page story that connects it, and I think there might be more throughout the story. But I gave it 5 stars. Again, really, like, there's nothing to it except for that we find out how they're connected. And I liked that she created that, because it really, because I was questioning it. I mean, if you saw my vlog, I was like, how are these two related? Because they have the same name, and it's because of that legacy title. That's why. And I loved it. I think the way that she connected them makes a lot of sense, especially for the character of Zeus, who plays a big role in that. And just kind of, it all feels realistic. Like, it doesn't feel like she tried to force these to go together somehow. It feels like this is legit how they would go together. So that one was the next one, which was 5 stars. And then the very last book I want to talk about is one that I've technically finished in May. But I finished it on the 1st of May, and it was for April, so I did want to mention it really quickly here. And that was my nonfiction for April, which was In the Shadow of the Empress by Nancy Goldstone. This one follows the lives of Maria Theresa and then her 3 daughters, including Marie Antoinette. I mean, she's got 16 kids, like, don't get me wrong, but these are the 3 that really shaped this part, like Hungary in this part of the world. So we had Mary Theresa, and then her daughters Marie Antoinette, Marie Christina, and Maria, oh shoot, what was the other one? Maria Carolina, Maria Christina, and Marie Antoinette. I loved this story. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. I just thought that it worked really well together, because it's like 3 parts to it. So you've got the first part, which we follow Maria Theresa, how she became Empress, how she, you know, how she was in that role. This book is very war heavy, because at this time war was happening right and left, which is not something I really enjoy, but the politics behind it was very interesting to me. So her section at the beginning is very heavily focused on war, because that's what she had to deal with for a lot of her reign as Empress. So it follows that section, and then the middle section is her 3 daughters as they become who they become, how they marry the people they marry, their relationship with their mother, that kind of stuff. And then the very last section is about kind of what happens after their mom passes, and it's the 3 of them in their countries and how they dealt with everything, especially because near the end of this time period that she's writing about is when Napoleon Bonaparte kind of became powerful, and took over the world, basically. So it's a lot of that relationship. It's, again, this book is full of war. I'm not gonna lie, but there's a lot of aspects behind it. There's a lot of you know, court intrigue, which I do really enjoy, and I feel like I learned a lot about this time period, because, like, Napoleon Bonaparte is not someone that I know a lot about, and I know a good chunk about Marie Antoinette, but that's it. I don't really know about her mom. I don't really know about her sisters, and so just to see the relationship of this family and how each of them played a big role in creating this part of the world at this time. So I found it super interesting. Again, 4.5 stars, really enjoyed it. I've now gone down like a rabbit hole of wanting all the Nancy Goldstone books. And I think there's only like 3 more that, besides the 3 that I've read, that she, like, just her has written. I mean, she's written some books with other people, but like just she has written about different aspects in history. And I'm just like, please write more. I know it takes a long time to do the research behind all of this, and she just put this one out last year. So, like, I get it. We're probably not going to see something from her for a while, but I've become obsessed again. So, expect to see her name pop up quite a lot in the next few months, because I just have this feeling that her books are going to be the ones that I want to gravitate towards. But yes, technically this was my April nonfiction, even though I finished it on the 1st of May, so I wanted to mention it here. It was not included in any of the stats. It'll be included in the stats for May, but I very much enjoyed it. If you look up some of the books that Nancy Goldstone has written, now a lot of them about monarchs, but she does have one about Joan of Arc and things like that. If any of that's a time period that sounds interesting to you, I recommend it, because she has a way of writing that just is really modern and really puts you in the place of these characters, and also, or not these characters, but these people in history, but also has like a very sarcastic way of writing some things, because like her footnotes are great. Like you read her footnotes and they're sassy, and I love it because you're like, yeah, that's exactly what that's like. And I don't know, she has a very fantastic way of writing, and she really makes me learn these parts of history, which is why I read the book to begin with, is to learn something new, and I come out of her books always learning so much. So that's it. Those are the books that I read in the month of April. My voice is going. I don't know if you can tell, so I'm going to end this rather quickly, but please let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, or how you did in April, whether you participated in the Magical Readathon or not. I was very successful, as you can see. I finished my career and everything, so I'm excited for August when round 2 comes around, although I'm also nervous because I have a suspicious feeling that the career I chose is going to have a lot of prompts in April. So we'll see how that works. But let me know down below how your April was. And if you want to comment something but you're not sure what to comment a palm tree, because I'm seeing A For Aunties. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so don't forget to check all that out, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!